There's a lot of activity going on. People are running around meeting, and people are throwing together calculi of different things, and there's phases of it: Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. There's different players. There's, I don't think, too much romance, but plenty of comedy. And it's gotten the faculty to fight with each other over scarce resources. And it's gotten them to feel like they're constantly insecure, and that in order to survive, we're going to have to try and get the right answer on these goddamn grids, huh? There's no right answer. You can't win with the grid. But the big deals here are, this is lousy research. If they're telling you, we're doing some research on this to find out the distinctiveness of Cal State East Bay, or to find out the future of your college, or something like that. This is not how to do research. This is terrible research. They're not doing it with their avowed partner in shared governance. They didn't really do it with us very well either. They didn't include the faculty. They gave the faculty some marching orders and said, oh, well, you can be on the committees. And then, of course, there's the wicked problem, which the first people who used this are a couple of planners named Rittel and Weber, and I've got a slide with references of this that you'll see at the end. But they're talking about how there's different kinds of research problems. And in public policy, the research problems are very, very different from those of a biologist or a chemist or a French literature specialist, because your subjects are dynamic, for one thing, and they all have different goals, competing goals in some cases, and the ways to find out what sort of a policy you want to have are much more complicated than they are if you're studying a virus, which is obvious to most people. But their simple-minded format for doing this research ignores the human element, the difficulty of figuring out anything having to do with human affairs. So they increased their difficulty with the faculty by saying a lot of things that weren't true. Not just the fuzzy thinking statements like, let's roll out some process, but things like, well, when we saw the list of things that were going to get cut, and it was nearly all academic departments. It was hardly anything in student affairs or administrative affairs or whatever. And we said, well, you know, this is pretty out of balance. And they said, oh, well, academic affairs was spared during the last recession. And we're like, I was here then. I can tell you how many faculty suddenly were recruited. We were in the middle of an interview in, I think it was 08. And, or no, it was the one before. It was 2002, there was a recession, right? And they canceled that, and many, many, many hiring processes were canceled during the preceding years. So if they say things that are counter to your experience, they're counter to your experience because they're not true. They just say stuff. The acting vice president during this said to me, well, we need to do this because Cal Poly is like a teenager that doesn't know who it is. Who he is. And I said, really? You've been here 4 months. What are you basing that on? What tells you that we're immature? It just, you know, says something that sounds like it's a good reason to do a bunch of committee meetings where we talk about our identity and our brand and all of this stuff. So we said to them, these things that you've made into problems are not our problems. We don't have a problem with our vision or our identity. We don't need to work on that. If you want to have a nice conversation about these things, that's fine. But we're awfully busy doing the work that we were hired to do. We don't need this. We commented that their heavy-handed orchestration of the research defeated its own purpose. We said nobody does research like this. We said our students can do better research than this. They know better than to have the head of an organization. Mike Ortiz was asking ASI to bring some students into a room, and he was asking them some questions. Who thinks those students told him what they really think? I don't see any hands. Our students think that if we're going to rename the university, it should be called the University of Red Tape. Or the university where you can't get classes. So they didn't say that stuff to him. And he came up with a survey for students, and there was one for faculty too, that bypassed the Institutional Review Board. If you want to do a survey here, don't you have to submit it? Submit your whole research prospectus to the IRB and wait for 6 or 8 months before you're allowed to do that research with human subjects, huh?
Yes.
Oh, guess what? He didn't have to do that. So he circulated a very poorly constructed, engineered survey to get the answers that he wanted. And if there are, in fact, a few academics who are in on this stuff too. A couple that I like were named Robert Zemsky and Joni Finney. Anybody read their paper? They published a paper called, this is in 2010, Changing the Subject, Costs, Graduation Rates, and the Importance of Re-Engineering the Undergraduate Curriculum. They work at the Institute for Research on Higher Ed, University of Penn, in which they claim that the issue of cost is because we need to make institutional resources match student needs, whatever that means. But their whole argument is that the most important things to look at in an educational institution are cost and outcomes. Whatever happens in between there, that's not worrisome at all. And needless to say, they're now on the consulting circuit, the little cottage industry of going around and talking to administrators about how to manage their affairs. So that's clearly a bogus problem for us. We tried calling on them whenever possible, calling them on their mistakes and their hypocrisies. Their public documents all talk about being learning-centered and student-centered, and that we're a learn-by-doing institution, and we're interested in student success, and we have excellent programs and quality education, and so on. But if you're defining a valuable program in terms of the FTES it generates, or the major-to-faculty ratio, that doesn't look too much like those other things. So remind them. Remind them of how arbitrary is that line in the sand between the good programs and the bad programs, and the big programs and the little programs. As I said, ours was 150 majors. So who says? And who says we don't need small programs? Is small bad? Is that what we are to understand? Is that small is bad? If so, no CSU campus probably would have an anthropology major, or philosophy, or a bunch of others. So this is just a summary of the things that we did that I think contributed to the more or less successful, though temporary, outcome that we achieved of derailing the PNR proposal. It would have been very, very bad if everything in that proposal had been implemented. colleges would have been torn down and remixed. Lots of programs would have disappeared. Lots of programs would have been jammed in with other programs that somebody thought were similar. So for instance, there was a list of environmental programs. There are a lot of people working on environmental issues in different disciplines. Does that mean they should unite in one department? Well, some administrators who've never taught a class, never graded a paper, never advised a student, never designed curriculum, might think so. So, look for what's happening to money. Remind them that it's about the students. They said it was. Remind them. We're researchers. Point out where their research has gotten screwed up. I don't know if you've had the pleasure of meeting Dave Bradfield, who's our colleague at Dominguez Hills. When they were under threat, they used an approach he calls the octopus, which was that the particular programs that were threatened had allies in the community that they could identify. Alums, maybe a local state assembly person, maybe some businesses, employers of those students, parents, etc. And they sent out a lot of letters, and those people called the then President Mildred Garcia and said to her, "What are you thinking?" And they backed off of some of that, at least. If you have some faculty who are cooperating with this because they don't know any better, because they're new and naive, or because they think there's something in it for them, or they've forgotten who they are, go and lobby them. Tell them, we see what you're doing. It's not good because of this, that, and the other. We have to stick together. We can't have people who are in it for themselves if we're going to defeat these efforts. Remind people that they are at a university, which is a very different institution from Phoenix or any of the other models that they are using. And the reason that universities have been around in the world for 1,000 years are because of those differences. And then I'm sure you're all familiar with George Lakoff's material on framing. I won't get into it with you because I see it running out of time. But they have co-opted some pretty important frames to do this, and those frames need to be replaced by our language and our ways of seeing things. So here are some of the references for these ideas. I'm going to give this to Jen so you can do whatever you like with it, copy it or put it on your website. And I hope you've got a couple of questions or comments for me